Warning: this clip contains spoilers. To watch the full film, skip this. 18 plus advised, and children, pregnant women, elderly with heart issues should be under medical care. Watching alone? Hug a pillow. With a partner? Hold them tight. I hope everyone enjoys watching and listening. Thank you. The story opens in a high valley, where Deli and Dan, a climbing couple, along with Hunter, Becky's best friend, are having fun climbing. However, an unexpected event occurs when Dan has an accident and falls from a high cliff right in front of Becky and Hunter. Even though that event happened over 51 weeks ago, Vicky's grief still lingers. She's stuck in the same old story from the past, because she misses Dan so much. All she can do is call Dan's phone and listen to his voicemail over and over again, which is making her life worse and worse. Her father is really worried about Vicky, but she isolates herself from everyone she knows, including him, because she wants to be alone. So, Becky's father had to go find her at a pub to wake her up and encourage her to move on from Dan and start anew. He told her that the world is still big and wants her back. But Vicky didn't improve, so he called Hunter, her best friend, present at Dan's incident, to help. Hunter visited Vicky and proposed a climb. Hunter suggested climbing a 2,000-foot TV tower, isolated and closed. She feared happiness. Hunter urged her to conquer that fear, climb the tower, and scatter Dan's ashes to start anew. That night, Hunter came to see Vicky and proposed a challenging climbing program. The thing Hunter wanted to climb was a TV tower that stands over 2,000 feet above the ground, far away from people and already closed off. But since Dan's tragic incident, Vicky hadn't gone anywhere at all. She felt like she was afraid of happiness. However, Hunter told her that she needed to overcome that fear and climb to the top of the tower to scatter Dan's ashes as a way to unlock her new life. Eventually, Vicky agreed to climb the tower, and the next morning, the two girls set off on their journey. But Hunter told her that she had to overcome her fear and climb to the top of the tower to scatter Dan's ashes as a way to unlock her new life. At some point, Vicky agreed to climb the tower. And the very next morning, the two girls set off on their journey. Even though there were warnings around the TV tower stating that it was a life-threatening area, the strong determination of the two girls meant nothing could hold them back. When they arrived, both of them were stunned by the height of the tower, which seemed to reach the sky beyond their wildest imagination. So, they started climbing up, with Hunter tying a rope to Becky and leading the way. However, Becky still felt scared. The scene showed that the TV tower they were climbing was starting to rust and had a lot of corrosion, and it was shaking in a really scary way. But during the initial climb, there were still some metal rungs that felt like they could break and cause a fatal fall, making Becky start to feel a bit uneasy. They climbed halfway, paused, then continued. Higher up, it got colder. Without poles, it was dangerous. Becky sang to stay brave. At the top, bolts loosened, barely audible over the wind. As they climbed higher, it got colder. They reached a point without steel poles, entering the most dangerous part. At the signal receiver, they saw rusty bolts loosening. Finally, they reached the top and screamed with joy. They released a drone and took selfies. Hunter hung off the edge with one hand for a photo. She also asked Becky for a photo of them holding hands with one hand. And then fear took over Becky's mind, so she had to sing while climbing to boost her spirits and encourage herself. When they reached the signal receiver of the tower, they noticed the rusty bolts that were holding the small ladder they were climbing on starting to come loose one by one. But with the strong wind, they could hardly hear anything. Finally, the two strong girls made it to the very top of the tower, where they started screaming with joy, and released a drone while taking selfies. But it seemed that the challenge for Hunter wasn't enough, so she decided to push herself further by hanging off the edge with one hand and asked Becky to capture the best shot. Not only that, but Hunter also told Becky to take a thrilling photo of them holding hands. With just one hand, because they were lucky that nothing happened to them. Then Vicky said a farewell to Red, before scattering his ashes with the wind blowing over the top of that tall pole. Once everything was ready, they prepared to go down to the ground again. But then something happened. The ladder that Becky was climbing down had a bolt come loose, causing the section of the ladder she was on to detach from its mount. This caused other rusty sections of the ladder to fall down. Fortunately, the rope was still holding at the top of the pole, pulling Becky up. However, it was unfortunate no section of the ladder left for them to climb down. At over 2,000 feet, neither phone had signal, leaving the two girls stranded at the top. Stranded, no ladder, no signal, found binoculars, flare gun, bag fell on receiver, Hunter reassured Becky. No signal on phones, binoculars and flare gun found, bag fell on signal receiver, too risky to retrieve, ladder fall loud enough for police call, waiting for help, Becky's leg injured. The two girls stayed calm and found a box on the pole which contained binoculars and a flare gun. They saw the bag had fallen onto the signal receiver of the pole, but Hunter warned against retrieving it due to danger. Hunter reassured Becky, saying when the ladder fell, it must have made a loud noise, and by now, someone would have called the police. They had to wait for help from the police as Becky's leg was still injured. Over 5 hours passed without help. They tried posting for help online and tied their phone to a rope, lowering it near the ground, hoping for a signal. But it didn't work because the phone still had no signal. They brainstormed, thinking if the phone reached the ground, the post might go through due to signal, so we just have to wait for help from the police. And right now, Becky's leg is still injured. But after 5 hours, there was no sign of help coming, so they tried posting on social media and tied their phone to a rope, lowering it close to the ground, hoping it would get a signal. The phone had no signal. They brainstormed a new plan, thinking if the phone reached the ground, the post might go through. After that, they stuffed the phone into a shoe and cushioned it with clothes and socks before throwing it down. They didn't know if it would work, but they kept waiting. After a while, there was no sign of help. Suddenly, a man walked close to the area of the pole, and when they saw him, they screamed for help, but he couldn't hear, so they decided to throw one of their shoes down. Realizing this, they stuffed their phone into a shoe and used clothes and socks to cushion it before throwing it down below. They had no idea if it would work, but they kept waiting. After a while, there was still no sign of help, just like before. Suddenly, a man walked close to the area of the pole. When the two girls saw him, they tried to scream for help, but it seemed like he couldn't hear them. So, they decided to throw one of their shoes down. As the man was leaving, Vicky was going to use the flare gun, but Hunter stopped her since it was daytime. A camper van was nearby with residents, and it would soon be dark. They chose to wait to use the flare gun. When they used the flare gun, the camper van owner saw them and seemed friendly, but he was a thief who stole their car. But it seemed like their bad luck wasn't over yet. When they used the flare gun, the owner of the camper van saw them, and they thought he was friendly. But it turned out he was a thief who drove up and stole their car before driving away. This made them feel hopeless, and the wound on Big A's leg started to look even worse. That night, Becky discovered Hunter had secretly dated Dan, her boyfriend. They didn't speak until morning when Hunter explained her relationship with Dan was a mistake. Hunter had fallen for Dan too, making it hard to see him marry her best friend. She comforted Becky after Red's death because she needed to process her feelings too. Once they cleared the air, they started talking again and looked for ways to get down, but both showed signs of dehydration. Hunter then decided to tie a rope around herself to retrieve the bag on the signal receiver for water. As she lowered herself, she almost reached the bag, but the rope was too short. So, she removed the rope, stretched her arm, and managed to grab the bag. But she chose to let go because she loved Becky more. The reason she was there to comfort Becky after Red's death was that she wasn't strong enough herself, so she needed to escape and process her feelings too. She wanted to apologize for everything that had happened. Once they cleared the air, they started talking again and looking for ways to get down, but both of them were starting to show signs of dehydration. Hunter decided to tie a rope around herself to retrieve the bag on the signal receiver for water. Hunter lowered herself, nearly reaching the bag, but the rope was too short. She removed the rope, stretched, swung, and jumped to grab the bag, finally succeeding. Getting back up was harder as the rope was too short to grab. She looped the bag onto the rope before jumping to grab it again. Hunter grabbed it, tried to climb, but slipped, injuring her hand, making climbing impossible. She asked Becky to pull her up. Finally, Hunter got back up. But it turned out that getting back up was even harder, because the rope hanging down was too short for Hunter to grab onto. She had to loop the bag onto the rope before jumping to grab it again. Hunter successfully grabbed it and tried to climb back up, but she missed her footing and ended up falling back down to the end of the rope, injuring her hand and making it impossible for her to climb up. So she had to ask Becky to pull her up instead. And finally, Hunter managed to get back up again. After Becky had some water, they wrote a message asking for help and attached it to the drone in the bag, then controlled it to fly out towards a nearby model. But then, the battery ran out halfway, so they had to bring it back. Then they thought of a way to charge the drone, by climbing up to charge it from the signal lights at the very top. She had to keep climbing there until the battery was full. But in the meantime, she was constantly attacked by vultures flying in. But in the end, she was able to use the drone to fly out to the model again. But as their drone was flying closer to the model, a trailer suddenly crashed into their drone. Peggy was exhausted, and her leg injury was attracting circling vultures. The harsh truth: Hunter fell grabbing the bag, hit the receiver, and was seriously injured. He couldn't bear the pain, and succumbed. The truth came out. When Hunter went down, he fell and hit the receiver, which left him badly hurt. He died. The Hunter you see now is just my hallucination. Now, Hunter's body is being torn by vultures. When Peggy realizes everything, she feels very sad and thinks about her dad. Weak and wounded, vultures circled her. As she lay still, vultures pecked her leg. Seeing Hunter was my illusion. At this moment, Hunter's body was being torn apart by the vultures. Once Peggy realized everything, she felt incredibly sad and thought about her dad, because she believed she wouldn't make it back down. With her weakened state and the wounds attracting the vultures circling around her, eventually, as she lay still, the vultures swooped down and tried to peck at the wounds on her leg. And at that moment, Peggy opened her eyes and didn't catch the vulture before the voice of Hunter in her head told her that she needed energy and had to find something to eat. So, Peggy ended up eating the vulture to sustain her life. After Peggy had enough energy, she tried to fly to Hunter's body and sent a help message to her dad, before wrapping her phone in Hunter's shoes and stuffing it back into Hunter's body. Then she pushed Hunter's body down. Finally, her message was sent to her dad, and help arrived with him coming down to rescue her. Peggy, who survived, said that life is just temporary. It's too short, so we have to make the most of every moment. If there's something that makes us feel alive, that thing will spread this message far and wide. And the water has come to an end.